Good afternoon. Let me add my congratulations on your 60th anniversary. Let's hope we're all here to celebrate it again at your 120th. Okay, I have half an hour to share with you a sort of 4-hour presentation on the big issues that are changing the world, people, society, and farming. So let me start off this glimpse into the future that I'll be bringing with you along with two colleagues over this next short while. First of all, let's have a think about what's really changing, what the agenda is. How we'll live, where we'll live, what we'll be doing, what we'll be eating, what will our families be like, what will our society be like, what will work be like, and what will family and farming be like. So all of that in half an hour. Now the important question is, can you listen as quickly as I can speak? Okay, if you stop before I do, let me know. Okay, first things first. Look, the most important driver that is driving so much is the fact that the world's economy, currently around about $62 trillion US in real terms, is set to triple in the next 40 years. It's one of the most important drivers that will change dramatically and increase economic activity around our planet. Number one. Moving on from that, there are 5 other major drivers of change. Up here behind me, you can see globalization, climate change, and pollution, if you like, and waste. Issues of consumption and behavior around our consuming products and services, and the world's scarce resources, energy, and changes in work and work patterns and work styles. Now, of course, there's other change in faith and religion and family and structures outside of that, but these are the ones that are going to drive so much of our change that's going to influence what we do and where we do it and how we do it. So, let's have a think about people. Number one is most of you are people. So I expect most of you are interested in what's going to happen around people. First things first. This is a chart of the population of planet Earth. So depending on your theology, 2 to 5 million years ago, man appeared and almost nothing happened until 1955. And in 1955, we stopped dying. This huge change we hear about endlessly, not just economic activity, much of it driven by the fact there's more of us engaged in business, this huge spike is changing the way the world works dramatically. So let's look in a little bit more detail. The green part of this chart are the developed economies, the industrialized economies of the world, and the blue part is everybody else. And as you can see, all the new people are appearing somewhere else. And that's changing where we are active. And right now, we're halfway up an 80-year journey where we're tripling the population of the world. We're halfway up. So if you think we've arrived at the final destination of what it feels like to be on a planet that's changing that quickly, you're wrong. We're only about halfway up the change in the population of the planet. So where are we? Roughly, in Europe, for example, a quarter of the world's population was in Europe in 1900. That dropped to 12% by the turn of the millennium in 2000, and we're heading to be about 8% in the next 40 years. So in terms of volume of people, Europe is becoming less important. And as you can see, 7 of the next 9 billion people by 2050 will be in Africa and Asia. And that's where we are seeing all of the activity and the capacity for change in economic activity move towards. So there's some basic information. By the way, you can have access to all this material. I don't mind you having all of these slides to share amongst yourselves so you don't have to take notes all the way through. What's interesting is that all of that growth in total population has been in urban environments, net in urban environments. So the amount of urban population we're having has crossed now that we are predominantly as a world an urban world, not a rural living world. And that's set to continue. Again, massive implications on food supply and service provision to populations who, by and large, live in cities. So, another major rise is the rise of Muslim faith, a relatively young faith. We're talking about 26% of the world's population today being Muslim. By the end of 2050, which we're focusing on here, about a third of the world's population, and around 37% by 2100. The important thing is that 70% of the growth of that population I told you about are people being born in Muslim countries. And their preferences for foodstuffs, different forms of business that are Quranic compliant or lifestyles that comply to the Quran are changing business models. Because the world principally has by and large been run by the industrialized nations of the past, which were predominantly Judeo-Christian. So a very big change in terms of our values and beliefs. Economically, we're moving from about $2.7 trillion US business in the halal marketplace, which is multiple industries, to about 30 trillion. A huge opportunity, perhaps, for a halal tractor. So, what else is going on? Aging of populations, of course, we hear a great deal about, and the good news is most of us are aging with this, and all the pink parts of the world are average about 35 to 40. Europe is averaging life expectancy is moving northwards. We're having less children, and roughly we're heading for about 42 to 45 average lives in the Europe. And India, within 15 years, will still be average population age of 25. So Europe is getting ready for a midlife crisis and having a rest, and India is just going to work. So to give you the idea of the energy in those environments, very, very different dynamics going on. Of course, what you're seeing now is a population that's moving to around about 20% will be over 60. 20% of 9 billion, that's 1.8 billion people on the planet, will be over 60. Now, can you imagine getting around then? So the important part is we're doubling the number of people who are older in our society, and that changes what we eat and where we eat and what time we go to bed. So this is the age profile in Finland. If you go back to 1802, most folk in Finland were dead by the time they got to 35. Yeah, pretty good news, it's changed. Now, 200 years later, we're now around about 80. So just in 200 years, it's gone up 50 years. If that same rate of change were to happen, where would you be in, say, 40 years, 50 years, 100 years? So maybe it's 90, maybe it's 120, or maybe if you take a very extreme view of a guy called Aubrey de Grey who merges 7 sciences, he'll talk about maybe getting to 500 or 1,000. And maybe the first person to live to 1,000 could be 60 today. The point is there's so much invention and discovery that we haven't used in remedies for beating aging. In fact, some people argue that aging is curable. And that'll change our lifestyles, our behaviors, our attitudes, and certainly how much money you have to save for your pension. I don't know how much money you have to save for a 940-year pension. Or do you start saving in 900 years and put it off? Or we get fat and die young. And of course, these are diametrically opposed trends that we are seeing, all of which are being dealt with one way or the other. But of course, we have to respond to them. If you think about this, this is an ambulance that holds a 28-stone person and has a crane on the back to get them in. And this is a large seat for somebody who's a bit big. The point is, as we have change in our society, we have to respond to that change and produce according to the new reality. So, aging society is really predominantly around the fact we're having fewer children. And that's something I'll cover in a bit more detail in just a moment. If I can move on. Okay. This is some children, people in households. You know, if we're talking about food and feeding people and nourishment and lifestyles, which I'm talking to this afternoon, one of the things we have to accept that we live in very different worlds. If you take Africa, Middle East areas, about 4.7 people live in the average household. In Western Europe, it's about 2.6. And the forecasts are for Western Europe to go down to 2.1. And increasingly, we're living more isolated lives, and more isolated lives by choice, in lifestyle as well. The other side of the coin is having less children. In Western Europe, of course, we have a relatively low number of about 11.9, 12 children per 100,000, which is the statistic that's quite useful. Whereas if you look at Africa, Latin America, Africa, Middle East is 33.8 children. Very, very different dynamics. So we're not living in the same world in terms of the expectations of our families, the size of those families, and our lifestyle of living together. So we must be careful not to view the world through the lens of our own experience here in Western Europe. So what's the challenges involved in that? The first thing is there is an increasing reality that we're learning that the age of low-cost food is coming to an end. And that changes, again, our attitude to it. I'll bring up some facts in a moment. So food surplus, maybe we're reaching the end of our time there. So personalization, urbanization, sustainability issues, management of waste, distribution, rising transport costs, fuel in particular, apart from manpower, health and wellness. All of these are big issues in the food and nutrition industries. And I want to touch on some of those. But look, the first thing is food requirement is going to double in 50 years.